Assalamu alaikum, dear students. This session is about how many speakers of English. I hope and expect by the end of this session, you would have an idea of how many speakers of English are living in today's world and actually what is the nature of English language that they are using, whether they are its users as first language, second language, or as a foreign language. Well, my dear students, if we trace the history of any language, for that matter, different ways are used to calculate or to have estimates of the speakers of languages. When it comes to English language, actually there are various sources that have been used. For example, different kinds of linguistic surveys have been conducted. Then there are certain authors, linguists, and researchers who have given some estimates based on their own calculations about the number of speakers of English. Each of these research journals and periodicals and books and encyclopedias and other sources of surveys, etc., they have used various criteria, different criteria to calculate this, which has led to a lot of ambiguity and uncertainty. In fact, because there is not one clear-cut criterion for that, that is why there is an inbuilt uncertainty, and the calculations that are done in terms of the nature of the speakers who are included in that, it becomes really difficult whether we can rely on one source for the totals or the other. Generally speaking, the first language totals cited during 1990s, they generally speaking, they range from 350 to 450 million speakers of English who use English language as first language speakers. Well, within this 350 to 450 million, which is, of course, a huge gap, why there are differences in that? Because from author to author, researcher to researcher, and from linguist to linguist, or from person to person who would do surveys, etc., there are differences of opinion regarding the status of pidgins and creoles. Historically, it's difficult to decide. Actually, there is no line that would mark it, which pidgin or which creole is to be included when calculating these totals, or which variety of language or dialect not to be included, which should be excluded while doing those calculations. People have used different criteria for that. And because there are differences in criteria, consequently, there are differences in the ranges that they have given of the speakers of English as first language. So, if all these pidgins and creoles, they are considered as varieties of English, then their speakers should be included. And, if we include them, then the total range would increase, the levels would go high, up. But if we do not include them, it would go down. When it comes to the use of English language as language that is used as second language by the speakers, then again it becomes even more difficult. Why it becomes more difficult? Because the first language speakers, they use that language in their everyday lives. When it comes to second language, the degree with which it would be used, in how much proportion it would be used, that really varies. From region to region, that really varies from situation to situation, and also that varies from domain to domain. Also, another issue related to that is, as speakers of second language, what would be the criterion when it comes to fluency? Means to be fluent in speaking, how much of fluency would help you determine, okay, if this much fluent, then this person can be considered as a second language speaker of English. Again, because the criteria differs, of course, the results then also differ. In fact, a criterion of native speaker like fluency probably would be a very, very idealistic figure that the second language speakers would have fluency like the native speakers. Probably that is a bit too much ambitious, and that is not possible. However, different records have been maintained and different estimates have been presented to the world. For example, a British Council survey has referred to 1 billion people, that is 1,000 million people, engaging in learning English. And this is from the year 1997. So, of course, through the times, it has further increased. However, when, we are interpreting or we are kind of drawing conclusions from all these estimates of numbers of, the figures that are given, we need to be very, very conscious about it, because especially this kind of surveys that British Council, for instance, conducts, they include all the kind of learners, the beginners as well, who have a very low level of both proficiency and of fluency. If we look at, again, the facts and figures, according to the 1999 surveys, the total, population of world has crossed 6 billion. And approximately 1 in 4 of these, people who are living on the planet today, they use English language in some ways, at some level, with a kind of useful kind of level, having enough proficiency and fluency to use it for communicative purposes. However, something that is very significant when we want to understand the whole demographics of English language speaking community in the world, a very significant feature that we need to understand is that there is a major shift that is taking place, through the current times. Actually, there is a major shift in the center of gravity of language. What I mean by that is that if we go back and if we look at 1960s, majority of the speakers of English language, if we take the totality of, okay, this is the total number of the speakers of English language. So the majority of them, the most of the part of these speakers, they were the speakers of English language as first language speakers. However, through the last half a century or so, situation has completely changed. The population of the world is increasing very rapidly. As it is increasing, so for instance, the speakers of English as a second language in India is just 3 to 4% of the population of India. But because the population is so much that when we compare it with the Australian native speakers of English, the first language speakers, this is far more than that. So, what is the result? The result is that, in the world today, the speakers of English as a second language is far greater than the speakers of English as first language. Gradal 1999 asserts, and I'm quoting him here, the proportion of the world's population who have English as a first language will decline from over 8% in 1950 to less than 5% in 2050. So, this is his prediction that by 2050, its use as first language would decline. It does not mean that those who are using it as a first language would stop using it as a first language. What it means is population would grow so much that the non-native speakers of English who would be using it as a second language, they would outnumber the speakers of English as first language. He further says, the situation is without precedent for an international language. And I think this is very interesting. Nowhere in the history of human language we find any example of any language that would surpass English in this context. Overall, my dear students, the number of speakers of English as a second language and as a foreign language is increasing very rapidly in the world, and this is a significant factor that is going to contribute towards shaping the nature and form of English in tomorrow's world.